Mr. Colucci, USCIS has reported that from program inception through 2014, the EB-5 program has created a minimum 73,730 jobs and more than $11.2 billion in investments. How many more jobs and investment funds could the program have created if the minimum investment amounts had been indexed for inflation?
Chairman, that is not a statistic that I have personally calculated, nor have my staff members calculated. However, as outlined in the Secretary's letter to this committee, that is a legislative enhancement we currently seek, is to increase the minimum investment amount. And as also mentioned in that letter, if that is not something Congress is able to do, we are prepared and we are working to increase this amount through regulation.
Well, as far back as 1987, the INS recommended that the minimum investment amount in an investor visa program be adjusted periodically based on some criteria such as the consumer price index. And I am pleased that Secretary Johnson has indicated that USCIS intends to exercise its authority. Do you intend to fully recapture the value lost to inflation over the past quarter century?
I think, sir, that we still need to study exactly where we set or propose to set those investment amounts. I do think that we would certainly look at what Congress did as part of a number of the bills that address this area.
In instances where a capital development project is financed by a combination of EB-5 and conventional capital, DHS currently allows foreign investors to claim credit for jobs created by other people's money. The DHS Inspector General revealed one instance in which EB-5 investments accounted for 18% of the project's equity, and yet the foreign investors took credit for all the jobs the project created. Doesn't this make a mockery of the investor visa program's job creation goal?
Sir, as you pointed out in your opening statement, this is something through our regulation that we do allow EB-5 investors to take job creation credit from non-EB-5 sources. We recently did some analysis and found that without that, there would be about 160 industries that would not qualify for EB-5 funding because they could not create those jobs on their own. I would also say the reverse is true. There are many projects that are solely EB-5 funded, in addition to projects that, in a but-for scenario, in which we see lending letters from commercial financial institutions which state, we will not loan this money unless you go out and get that EB-5 financing.
Mr. Colucci, I understand your argument, but doesn't that, again, simply reflect the fact that the DHS has never adjusted the minimum investment levels for inflation? If you had done so, wouldn't the number of jobs created by investments in all the industries you just referenced have increased commensurately?
Sir, that is correct. If we did,
I've got a number of other questions, so let me keep moving. 17,662 aliens with approved investor visa petitions, including their spouses and minor children, are waiting for visas to become available right now as we sit here. And you have on hand 21,855 pending petitions. When you factor in accompanying family members, if any reforms to the EB-5 program only applied to prospectively filed petitions, such reforms would not actually take effect for over 7 years. Can such a delay be considered real reform?
Sir, those statistics you cite are accurate. We do indeed have approximately 21,000.
And an average of 3 green cards per petition, correct? So that's over 63,000 pending green cards. At 10,000 per year, we're getting over closer to 7 years of backlog. And under those circumstances, if we only make reforms prospective in nature, those reforms won't take place for 7 years. The program has generally not been authorized for as long as 7 years. So how are they meaningful reforms if they don't take effect for that long a period of time?
Sir, you are correct. Any regulations that we would implement would likely be forward-facing or prospective increases.
But for them to be effective, they would have to have some retroactivity if they're going to take effect in any way, shape, or form before 7 years from now.
So I know that in some of the bills that were introduced, there were provisions to increase additional fees for the petitions, the 526, the immigrant investor petition, and the removal of condition petitions that would add to the costs that are taken in by the United States government.
Let me turn to Ms. Calderon. Thank you, Mr. Colucci. You've written that gerrymandering has rendered the two-level investment threshold meaningless, and immigrants flocked to invest in luxury projects by major developers, and we gave some examples up here. Is this consistent with the intent of Congress to incentivize investments in rural and depressed urban areas?
Thank you. And that's actually why I mentioned the legislative history in the 5-minute presentation, that no, it's not at all consistent with that, with the two-tier system. I mean, the legislation that was first introduced had one tier, 1 million. And it was only later that the two-tier system was introduced by Senators Bosch and Graham, and they made clear throughout the congressional record that we found that the discounted amount was aimed at rural as well as depressed or inner cities.
The intent was to get a higher amount for those investments in areas that didn't qualify for rural or depressed urban areas.
Yeah, and apparently, I mean, the belief was that most investors would be investing at $1 million in 1990.
Right.
So
you write that if Congress seeks to incentivize development in areas which encounter difficulty in attracting the investment capital needed for economic growth, the commuter pattern construct would not be an appropriate way to designate a TEA. Could you elaborate briefly on that?
it's a takeoff on the fact that regional centers, unlike Matt Gordon's company, uses econometric models, basically is basing the job count not on direct jobs, but on the indirect and induced jobs. So there's really no way of proving where the workers are coming from. He points out that the jobs may not be reflective of long-term jobs. We don't know the location of their residences as well.
Thank you. And lastly, Mr. Gordon, do you believe that the EB-5 program reforms that I drafted last year, along with Mr. Conyers, Mr. Issa, Ms. Lofgren, and Senators Grassley and Leahy, would have corrected the abuses that have cropped up in the investor visa program? And do you think these reforms would make the program unattractive to developers or foreign investors?
I think that the draft bills, and there were many versions of them, so I started losing track of which parts we were at which points, but I do think that they went a long way, and also as part of the compromise negotiations that were taking place in December, to correct the ills of the program.
And with 63,000 people in the pipeline, 21,000 plus petitions, would they have scared off investors?
To some degree, it might have. And remember, that pipeline really is a problem when you're talking about investors from China, because due to the restrictions and the quotas for investors from each country, it wouldn't actually affect investors coming from outside of China at all. So it's...
Who should I ask about the AFLs?
Yeah, but 87% are from China, is that
yes,
not correct?
That's correct.
Right.
So again, markets tend to normalize, and as people have
Normalize at a higher level of investment in areas that might be more targeted to rural and high unemployment areas.
Sponsors would react to the incentive structure. So if it was in their best interest to focus on non-prime real estate locations, if it was in their interest to do so, they would look for other opportunities. And likewise, they would also look for investors from locations where there might not be such a non-price issue related to getting them to come on board. So maybe they'll focus on other areas of the world than simply China.
Thank you. Chair